Stephen King's darkest story, the horror that writes itself, the man trapped in his own nightmare. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that the horror stories you've written for decades aren't just fiction, but glimpses of your own life, that the nightmares you put on paper somehow find their way into reality. What if Stephen King, the master of horror, was never just telling stories, but predicting his own fate? This is the untold story of Stephen King's darkest narrative, a pattern hidden beneath the pages of his books and woven into the fabric of his own life. The Birth of Fear, a childhood mystery. Stephen King was born in 1947 in Portland, Maine, but his childhood was marked by two events that could have been ripped straight from one of his novels. The first was the disappearance of his father. One night, Donald King walked out for cigarettes and never came back. No warning, no explanation, just gone. That sudden absence would shape many of King's stories, where fathers are unreliable, missing, or worse. The second event is even more chilling. When King was very young, he went out to play with a friend near some railroad tracks. Hours later, he came home pale, shaking, unable to speak. His mother later discovered that his friend had been struck and killed by a train. King himself has no memory of what he saw, but the imagery of childhood trauma, death, and the unknown would become a cornerstone of his horror. Think of IT, where children face an unspeakable terror, or Pet Sematary, where grief takes a monstrous form. Did something he saw that day bury itself deep in his subconscious, waiting to resurface through his stories? The addiction to horror and to something else. King's teenage years were filled with horror comics, B-movies, and writing, but as he found success, he also found himself trapped in a different kind of nightmare. By the 1980s, King was drowning in addiction, alcohol, cocaine, and prescription pills. He was writing bestsellers, but he was barely functioning. He later admitted that he has no memory of writing Suyo. And here's where the eerie connection begins. Many of his greatest characters struggle with addiction and madness. Jack Torrance in The Shining, a writer, just like King, descends into alcoholism, losing himself to a force beyond his control. Eddie Dean in The Dark Tower fights a heroin addiction. Even Paul Sheldon in Misery is dependent on painkillers. Was King exercising his demons on the page, or was he unknowingly predicting his own downfall? The near-death experience that changed everything. Then, in 1999, something happened that was so eerily like a Stephen King novel, it's hard to believe it was real. One afternoon, King was walking near his home when a van came out of nowhere, striking him at nearly 60 miles per hour. He was thrown into a ditch, bones shattered, lung collapsed. He should have died. And here's the creepy part. The man who hit him, Brian Smith, was eerily similar to one of King's most terrifying characters, Annie Wilkes from Misery. Just like Annie, Smith was obsessed with King's work. When police arrived, they found several of King's books in Smith's van. King later joked that it was as if he had written his own near-death experience into reality. But what if it wasn't a joke? After the accident, King's writing took a strange turn. He wrote himself into the Dark Tower series as a character, directly acknowledging his role as the creator of his own nightmare. Even stranger, he bought the van that nearly killed him and later destroyed it. Was this an act of closure? Or was he trying to erase something far more sinister? The Stephen King narrative pattern, fiction becoming reality. Here's the chilling theory. What if King's life has always followed a hidden pattern, the same structure found in his books? 1. The ordinary world, slowly tainted by horror. His early life seemed normal, but darkness was always present. His father's disappearance, his friend's tragic death. 2. The unseen monster, addiction, fate, or something more sinister stalked him, just like Pennywise in IT or Randall Flagg in The Stand. 3. A near-death experience that changes everything, like a protagonist in one of his own stories. King faced a moment that could have ended everything, but instead, it led him into a new, darker reality. If Stephen King isn't just writing horror, what if he's unknowingly living inside one of his own stories? And if that's true, how does it end? Stephen King once wrote, "Monsters are real, and ghosts are real too. They live inside us, and sometimes they win." But what if the real monster isn't inside his books or even inside his mind? What if the true horror is that Stephen King has never been writing fiction? He's been writing his own future, one nightmare at a time. And if that's the case, what happens when he writes his last story? If you found this story as chilling as we did, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the world's most mysterious and terrifying stories. Let us know in the comments, do you think Stephen King's life is following the same horror pattern as his books? Or is it all just coincidence? Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that come true.